The Grand Rapids Convention Center welcomed visitors on a cool October morning. Mary Durant arrived just as it opened. She wanted to take a quiet look at the booths before the crowds arrived. Her dream of owning her own home was getting closer. After 5 years as an editor, she'd finally saved up for a down payment. High ceilings, glass partitions, and perfectly calibrated lighting made it feel like the future. Mary walked leisurely from booth to booth, perusing the latest in security and home automation systems. She made notes in her notebook, comparing prices and features of different manufacturers. The stand of Holbrook Technologies stood out for its minimalistic design. A large screen showed the smart home in real time. You could see how the system reacted to motion, adjusted lighting, and temperature. Mary paused, mesmerized by the smooth transitions of the interface. "Impressive, isn't it?" The voice behind her was deep and calm. She turned around and met the gaze of a tall man in a gray suit. His eyes radiated intelligence and energy. "Aidan Holbrook, founder of the company. I can tell you more about the system." The next hour flew by. Aidan talked about the technology with such passion and knowledge that Mary almost forgot to take notes. He demonstrated the system's capabilities, explained how it worked, and answered questions. At one point, the conversation moved smoothly from technical specs to a discussion of what she envisioned her future home to be. "Mary, there you are!" Zoe Larson's ringing voice brought them both back to the reality of the showroom. Her friend was hurrying toward the booth, maneuvering between visitors. "I've been calling you for an hour. Did you forget we agreed to meet at the cafe?" Mary smiled guiltily. She really had lost track of time. Aidan held out a business card to her. "Call me when you've decided on a house. I'll handle your project personally." His fingers lingered on her palm for a second. Already at the cafe, Zoe was questioning her friend about her new acquaintance. Mary shrugged it off, but inwardly she recognized that Aidan had impressed her. It wasn't just his looks or his demeanor, it was his inner strength, the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted out of life. The business card was burning the pocket of her purse. Mary decided that she would call him in a couple of days. She had to show that she was really interested in the system, not just looking for an excuse to meet. Who was she kidding anyway? Smart home technology was suddenly much more interesting than it seemed in the morning. As she sorted through her bag that evening, she reread the business card one more time. Simple white cardboard, minimalist design, clear lines of the logo. Everything spoke of the owner's impeccable taste. As she fell asleep, Mary thought about how amazing life can be sometimes. She came to choose a security system and found someone who could be much more important than any technology. The last of the fall leaves had fallen when Mary decided to call Aidan. The call was followed by a business lunch, then an informal meeting, and then events spun at breakneck speed. Their first real date was at a small jazz bar in historic Grand Rapids, where they talked until closing time. By early December, they were seeing each other almost every day. Aidan proved to be an attentive listener and an interesting conversationalist. He talked a lot about his path in the IT business and how he built a company from the ground up. Mary shared stories from the publishing house, her plans for the future. His self-confidence and clear vision of goals admired her. The search for a house began spontaneously. One evening, they were driving through a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, and Mary noticed a for sale sign. A small 2-story house with a glassed-in porch and a pine tree-lined lot seemed exactly what she'd dreamed of. Aidan immediately called the realtor and arranged a viewing. The house was even better than it looked from the outside. Bright rooms, hardwood floors, large windows in the living room. The second floor was the perfect place for a home office. The kitchen needed renovation, but that only added to the charm. Mary was already envisioning how she would furnish it to her liking. "It's got great wiring," Aidan remarked, studying the specs. "You could install a full smart home system without major remodeling." His eyes lit up as he began to explain the possibilities. Automatic lighting control, climate control, security system, all would work as a single entity. The transaction went surprisingly smoothly. Aidan helped with the paperwork and recommended a reliable bank for the mortgage. When Mary got the keys, he insisted on personally handling the installation of the automation system. "It will be my gift," he said, accepting no objections. The work took almost a month. Aiden arrived every day after work, often staying late, checking settings and calibrating sensors. Mary watched him with admiration. His passion for his work, his attention to detail, was mesmerizing. They often ate dinner on the floor, discussing plans for the house. The day the system was fully set up, Aiden gave Mary an unusual demonstration. When she entered the house in the evening, the lights would turn on behind her, following her on her way to the living room. There, a set table and a bouquet of her favorite peonies awaited her. Music played by itself as she stopped at the window. "Everything works perfectly," Aiden said, hugging her from behind. "The house will take care of you now, however." He turned her toward him. "I'd like to share that care with you." The ring in his hand caught the glow of the setting sun. "Will you marry me?" Mary didn't hesitate for a second. Her yes echoed through the empty house, which suddenly seemed even more familiar and cozy. They talked all night, making plans for the future, dreaming of a life together. As she fell asleep in Aiden's arms in the morning, Mary felt absolutely happy. Zoe, having learned the news, was surprised at the speed of events, but was genuinely happy for her friend. "The important thing is that you're happy," she said, looking at the ring. Mary only smiled. She was sure that she had met the man with whom she was ready to spend the rest of her life. It was a rainy spring. Mary quickly got used to the comfort of the smart home. The lights came on at the entrance, the temperature was regulated, and in the mornings the coffee maker started preparing her favorite cappuccino just as she was getting up. The system became an indispensable assistant, and Mary often wondered how she had lived without it. The first oddities began unnoticed. "You haven't had breakfast today?" Aiden asked one day during the morning call. "Why would you think that?" Mary wondered. The coffee maker didn't turn on at the usual time. There was concern in his voice. Mary laughed. She had overslept and decided to get coffee at the office. Gradually, more questions came up. Why was the bedroom light on until 3 in the morning? Reading a new manuscript. Why did you go into the office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? You have a workday. I forgot my papers. Each time there was a logical explanation, but something subtly changed in their relationship. Work had begun on a major new project at the publishing house. Mary often stayed late, holding meetings with authors. One evening, returning home after a protracted discussion with a new author, she found Aiden in the living room. "I was worried," he said. "Why didn't you answer your phone? Who were you with?" There was an unfamiliar metallic note in his voice. Mary's phone found itself increasingly inundated with messages. "Where are you? Why aren't you at work? Who are you seeing?" Aiden insisted on installing a location tracking app, "So I can get there quickly if something happens." He was particularly annoyed by Mary's interactions with male colleagues. New art director James stopped by her house twice to pick up layouts. "Next time, have him send a courier," Aiden cut him off. "I've seen through the cameras the way he looks at you." Zoe was the first to notice the change in her friend. At their traditional lunch meetings, Mary was constantly checking her phone, texting her whereabouts. "Since when do you report to him?" Zoe asked directly. Mary shrugged. She thought that seemed normal for an engaged couple. One evening, flipping through wedding magazines, Aiden remarked casually, "You know, you won't have to work after the wedding. I'll provide for the family just fine." Mary tensed. "But I love my job." "You'll need to take care of the house, the kids." "What kind of work?" There was no question in his voice, only affirmation. The smart home system continued to work properly, making life more convenient. But now, every light on, every doorbell, every movement was being tracked and analyzed. "Baby, I'm just looking out for your safety," Aiden would say as he added another camera or sensor. More and more often, Mary caught herself thinking before she did anything. How would it look in Aiden's eyes? Should she stay late at work? Would it be okay to go to the corporate party? Is it convenient to invite coworkers over for coffee? Zoe was getting more and more insistent on trying to talk to her friend. "This isn't normal, Mary. He's controlling your every move." But Mary waved it off. The wedding was only 3 months away. They were both just nervous. Besides, wasn't it natural for a loving man to worry and care? She tried not to notice how her social circle was gradually shrinking, how she was meeting with friends less and less often, how the habit of reporting every step was becoming second nature. After all, it was all for their future happiness. Isn't it? Only sometimes, late at night, looking at the flashing lights of the cameras, did she feel a vague unease. But in the morning, coffee would brew, lights would turn on, her favorite music would play, and the anxiety would recede. Technology made life more convenient. And if they also helped Aiden feel safe for her, what was wrong with that? A freelance writer had brought the material to the publisher, a big article on domestic violence. Mary started reading the text as usual, red pen in hand, looking for stylistic flaws and inaccuracies. But after only a few paragraphs, the pen froze. At first, it was a concern, the heroine of the article recounted. He called 10 times a day to make sure I was all right, asked where I was and who I was with. He said he was worried. Then he started asking why I was late for work. Why wasn't I home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Who was I meeting with? Every move I made demanded an explanation. It took me a while to realize it wasn't love. It's control. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. She reread the paragraph again, then another. Aiden's voice rang in her head. Where have you been? Why didn't you answer? Who have you been seeing? She called the author of the article and made an appointment to meet with the heroine of the piece, ostensibly to confirm details. Sarah, a petite woman with tired eyes, agreed to meet at a small coffee shop away from the center. You know what the worst part is? Sarah slowly stirred her cooled tea. Not the restrictions themselves, but how imperceptibly you start to think of them as normal. First, you refuse to see your friends. Well, he's worried. Then you change jobs. He's right. That one was too stressful. Then you stop wearing makeup. Why, you don't go anywhere. Every word hit the mark. Mary remembered how she'd canceled her high school reunion. Aiden had said there'd be too many former classmates there. How she stopped going to the gym. He was worried the trainer was too young. How she was seeing Zoe less and less often. That evening, she called a friend. Zoe rushed over 20 minutes later, no questions asked. They talked till dawn. Or rather, it was mostly Mary talking, as if a dam had burst. About how she was suffocating from the constant scrutiny. How tired she was of making excuses for every move. How afraid of losing herself. I kept thinking, maybe I'm exaggerating? Mary sat with her arms around her knees. Maybe it's normal to care so much, but today I realized it's not caring. It's a cage. Beautiful, technologically advanced, but a cage. The next night, she waited for Aiden in the living room. There was a ring on the table. We need to talk. He listened to her silently, not interrupting. His face remained calm, too calm. Only the jowls were going under his skin. You don't realize what you're doing. His voice was quiet and steady. You're making a mistake. I'm the only one who truly cares about you, who protects you. He reached out for the ring, but Mary was quicker. No, Aiden. That's not caring, that's control, and I don't want to live like that anymore. The next week turned into a nightmare. Aiden called from different numbers. He wrote endless messages ranging from pleading to threatening. One time she found his car outside the publisher's office. Another time he was waiting for her outside her house. We just need to talk, he repeated. Mary changed all his passwords, blocked his number, disabled his access to the smart home system, called in the professionals to check for hidden cameras or bugs. The house was her fortress again. At night, lying awake, she heard the sound of her phone, a message from an unfamiliar number. You belong to me. You'll realize that yet. Mary deleted the message without answering. For the first time in her relationship with Aiden, she spent an evening free of control, and for the first time truly scared. Outside the window, the nighttime city was buzzing. The security lights flickered as usual. But they weren't alarming now. This was her home again, her rules, her life. No matter what happened next, she would not return to the golden cage, even if she had to defend her freedom every day. The day began with the smell of coffee and sunlight streaming through the curtains. Mary stretched and smiled. The weekend promised to be warm, which meant she could finally garden. She had long wanted to plant a small flower bed under the kitchen window. The publishing house was buzzing with the release of a new novel by a promising author. Mary immersed herself in her work, only occasionally taking short breaks. James dropped off the mock-up of the cover. Bright, eye-catching, not at all like the usual publishing templates. Zoe had called at lunchtime. She was going to Chicago for a long weekend and wanted to come along. "Let's go shopping, go to the theater. You need to unwind." Mary agreed without hesitation. After a short argument, they picked a date in 2 weeks. In the evening, she stopped by the supermarket. The refrigerator needed replenishing. Fresh vegetables, her favorite tea, and a pack of pasta went into the cart. She lingered at the wine shelf, selecting a bottle of red for dinner. She'd been cooking more lately. It was calming, it turned out. At home, Mary turned on some music. While cooking dinner, she danced to her favorite tunes and thought about her upcoming trip. She'd have to update her wardrobe. The last time she'd gone shopping had been forever ago. After dinner, she settled down with her laptop in her favorite chair. In the mail was a letter from the author whose book they were preparing for publication. He offered to meet next week to discuss final revisions. Mary replied in agreement and made a note on her calendar. Before going to bed, she took a long bubble bath, leafing through design magazines on her tablet. Maybe it was time to update the interior. The bedroom was long overdue for a makeover, and the living room could use a change. The last ritual of the evening was to check the security system. After making sure all the doors were locked and the alarm was on, Mary went upstairs to the bedroom. Outside the window, pine trees rustled their leaves, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. She turned off the light and closed her eyes. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the publishing house was worried. Mary was never late, much less for a planning meeting, and she always gave notice if she was running late. Her cell phone was unavailable. After 11, Sarah, the department head, pulled out her personnel file and found an emergency contact. Zoe answered after the first beep. As she listened to Sarah's excited voice, she felt everything go cold inside. "I'm going to drive over to her house now. I have the keys." All the way there, she tried to call her friend. The house greeted her with silence. The front door was locked. The alarm was on. "Mary!" Zoe went up to the second floor. The door to the bedroom was closed. She pushed it open and screamed. Detectives McAllister and Endicott arrived 20 minutes after the call. Forensics were already working on the house. Initial examination indicated an accident, a problem with the gas appliance. The body was found in the bed, as if Mary had simply fallen asleep. "Tell me about the last few days." Detective Endicott gently handed Zoe a glass of water. They sat in the kitchen while the task force worked upstairs. She was fine, she really was. We were going to Chicago in 2 weeks. She finally made it out. Zoe hesitated. "Broke out?" McAllister looked up from his notepad. Zoe was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She recently broke off her engagement. Her ex, he was too controlling. At the publishing house, the detectives spent several hours. Colleagues were talking about the same thing. Mary was in good spirits, planning new projects, discussing a future meeting with an author yesterday. "You know, she's changed a lot in the last month," Sarah shared. "It's like a weight has been lifted off her shoulders after she broke up with her fiancé." Aiden Holbrook arrived at the station himself after hearing the news. Impeccably dressed, calm, genuinely saddened. "We broke up, but I still cared for her. It's terrible." He answered the questions clearly and confidently. Only once did he stumble. "Tell me about where you were yesterday," McAllister asked the question mundanely, like one of many. Aiden twitched his shoulder. "At work until 8, then home. I told you, working on a new project. I was alone in my house when she died during the night. That's easy to verify." The detectives exchanged quick glances. They hadn't told anyone the time of death yet. The experts had just gotten to work. Endicott made a note in her notebook without changing her facial expression. "Thank you, Mr. Holbrook. We'll be in touch if we need more information." As soon as the door closed behind him, McAllister turned to his partner. He knew. The technical experts had spent the entire day in the house. The smart home system was complex, but perfectly set up. "Everything works like clockwork here," one of the experts shared. "Too like clockwork," his colleague muttered as he studied the system's logs. By evening, the detectives had 2 facts. The first, the system showed signs of remote access. The second was that the gas boiler was in working order, but someone had changed its settings that night. The accident theory had fallen apart. McAllister stared at the evidence board. The perfect crime. No signs of tampering, no struggle. Just the fine-tuning of the system that had turned the house into a murder weapon. Only a man who knew every detail of this house intimately could have done that. A man who installed the system himself. There was silence in the technical section of the Grand Rapids Police Department. Only the computers hummed quietly, and the occasional keyboard clattered. 3 experts were methodically checking every byte of information from Mary's smart home system. Detective Endicott sat nearby, watching them work. The screens flashed lines of code, graphs of system activity, access logs. She didn't understand the technical details, but she saw the experts glance around from time to time, making notes. McAllister was talking to a technician from the company that had installed the system. The young man was nervously rubbing his badge. Mr. Holbrook supervised the installation himself. He personally programmed the main modules, said he wanted to make sure his fiancée was safe. The detective's office has new information, security footage from the restaurant where Aiden allegedly spent the evening. The security guard pointed to a timestamp. This is where his car pulls out of the parking lot, 21:30. 3 hours before Mary's estimated time of death. The phone companies sent over the call detail. Mary received calls from different numbers in the weeks leading up to her death. They all turned out to be one-time, prepaid calls. Classic stalking pattern, untraceable. Zoe brought printouts of the messages Mary sent her. The threats were getting more and more explicit. "You'll be sorry. You belong to me. I'll always be there for you." Mary didn't take them seriously. She considered them an attempt at manipulation. Detectives canvassed every locker in the city. They found a trace in one of them. A tall man rented a locker for a month. Cash payment, paperwork's obviously fake. A laptop computer was found inside. Forensics recovered some of the browser history. The search was methodical. Carbon monoxide mortality statistics, time of onset of unconsciousness in poisoning, Colorado concentration in closed rooms. Technical details were missing from the search. Whoever was looking for this clearly understood smart home systems professionally. By morning, the technicians had finished analyzing the system. The logs revealed evidence of remote access shortly before Mary's death. Someone had gained control of the system and changed the settings on the gas equipment. McAllister spread the materials out on the table. The picture was coming together. Inconsistencies in the time of departure from the restaurant, traces of remote access to the system, a search history about carbon monoxide exposure, and most importantly, that strange caveat about the night during the interrogation when Aiden had given away information he couldn't possibly know. Endicott looked through old engagement photos, happy faces, smiles, congratulations. The smart home system had been a wedding gift. The husband-to-be had truly protected the house from everyone, except himself. Aiden Holbrook was arrested early one morning outside his company's office. He looked impeccable, expensive suit, polished shoes, smooth-shaven face. Only his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. He didn't resist, silently held his hands out under the handcuffs and sat quietly in the police car. In the interrogation room, Aiden remained silent. McAllister methodically laid out the documents in front of him, surveillance printouts from the restaurant, phone records from disposable numbers, screenshots from recovered browser history. Aiden stared at one point, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. Detective Endicott read out the facts. On the night of the murder, his car had been seen near Mary's house. Technical experts had confirmed remote access to the smart home system at that exact time. The laptop from the storage locker was searched for carbon monoxide exposure. Everything pointed to a carefully planned murder. At some point, Aiden spoke. His voice sounded flat, almost lifeless. He talked about how he'd met Mary, how he'd fallen in love with her, how he dreamed of a future together, about how he had installed the system in their future home, thinking of every detail. He talked at length, but never once mentioned the murder itself. The district attorney personally prosecuted the case. It was charged with several counts: first-degree murder, stalking, and unlawful use of electronic systems. Each count was supported by evidence. In the courtroom during the arraignment, Aiden sat motionless. His lawyer tried to talk about temporary mental confusion, about the severe emotional distress after the breakup of his engagement. The prosecutor methodically described a pattern of premeditated murder, backing up every word with evidence. As Aiden was led back to his cell, he showed emotion for the first time all day. Turning to the detectives, he said quietly, "She was mine. You understand, don't you? Just mine." There was no remorse or fear in his eyes, only a cold certainty that he was right. The news of the arrest of the founder of Holbrook Technologies instantly spread throughout the city. The phones at the police department were ringing off the hook with calls from reporters. Detectives answered dryly and briefly. "The case has been transferred to the prosecutor's office. The suspect has been arrested. Further comment after the investigation is complete." On McAllister's desk lay the Mary Durant case file. He stared at the photograph affixed to the first page, a smiling young woman, her whole life ahead of her. Now there was a long trial ahead, but the main thing was done. The killer had been caught, and no one else would suffer from his obsession with control. There was silence in the Kent County courtroom. The prosecutor methodically presented the evidence, one by one. The police technical expert explained to the jury in detail exactly how the smart home system had been hacked, how the security sensors had been disabled, how the gas equipment settings had been changed. Zoe was called to testify on the third day of the hearing. It was the first time she'd been in the same room with Aiden since the funeral. Trying not to look in his direction, she talked about the last few months of her friend's life, about how Mary's behavior had changed since the engagement, how she'd stopped going out with her friends, how she'd started checking her phone every few minutes. "Was she afraid of him?" the prosecutor asked. Zoe shook her head. "No, not then. She was just tired of being controlled, talking like she was living in a cage. Even at home she didn't feel free. He always knew where she was and what she was doing." The detectives took turns testifying. Endicott presented a chronology of harassment, calls from disposable cell phones, threatening messages. McAllister described the very reservation during questioning, how Aiden himself gave out information about the time of the murder that he couldn't have known. Technical experts explained to the jury in detail how a smart home works, about how a system designed to provide security was turned into a murder weapon. The killer's careful preparation, studying the effects of carbon monoxide, timing. Aiden's lawyer tried to base his defense on his client's emotional state. He spoke of his mental confusion after the breakup of the engagement, of his strong feelings, of his inability to come to terms with his loss. But his words were shattered by the cold technical facts and methodical preparation of the murder. Aiden himself had not uttered a word during the entire trial. He sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Only when Zoe testified did his fingers begin to beat a rhythm on the table, as if he were typing a code on an invisible keyboard. The jury deliberated briefly. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the verdict, life without parole, Aiden looked up for the first time in the entire trial. He looked not at the judge, but somewhere over the heads of those present, as if he saw something only he could see. As she left the courtroom, Zoe felt not relief, but a strange emptiness. Justice had been served. The murderer had been punished. But that wouldn't bring Mary back. She took out her phone, habitually checked her notifications, and suddenly she resolutely turned them all off. The local papers were still discussing the Aiden Holbrook case for a long time. The story of how technology had become a murder weapon kept people on their toes. Experts wrote articles about the safety of smart homes. Psychologists speculated about the nature of the obsession with control. Holbrook Technologies did not survive the scandal. One by one, customers were canceling their contracts. No one wanted to do business with a firm whose founder used his own designs to kill. The office building emptied, the sign was taken down, employees left for other companies. Detectives McAllister and Endicott went back to their regular jobs. Occasionally, while reviewing incident reports, they would come across mentions of smart homes and security systems. Each time it brought an unpleasant chill. They remembered all too well how technologies meant to protect could turn against their masters. A plaque was erected at the publisher's office. The last book Mary had edited was published. A short dedication with her name appeared on the title page. The The manuscript she worked on her last night remained unfinished. Zoe came to the cemetery often. She'd bring Mary's favorite peonies, sit by the grave for long periods of time, talking about everything that was going on, how she missed her, how angry she was that she couldn't prevent the tragedy, about learning to move on. One day she met Mary's parents there. They hugged in silence, understanding each other without words. Then they sat on a bench for a long time, reminiscing. Mary's mother pulled out an old album, childhood photos, school graduation, first day at the publishing house. A happy smile, bright eyes, all life ahead. Mary's house was sold. The first thing the new owners did was dismantle the entire smart home system. Now it's just ordinary switches, ordinary locks, ordinary thermostat, no sensors, no remote access, just fresh flowers on the windowsills and children laughing in the garden. At the police academy, Mary Durant's case became textbook material. Young detectives were taught the importance of spotting warning signs, how technology could become a weapon in the hands of an obsessive person, how thin the line between care and control was. Zoe was slowly returning to normal. She still flinched when the phone started ringing too insistently. She still double-checked to make sure the door was locked. She still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night with nightmares, but life went on. In his cell, Aidan Holbrook spent his days reading technical journals. He never appealed, never asked for a reduced sentence. He was silent in his sessions with the prison psychologist. Only sometimes his fingers began to beat a familiar rhythm, as if he were still programming something only he could access. The world moved on. Technology continued to advance. Smart homes were getting more and more advanced. But now there was a new clause in the installation instructions about liability and access control. That even the most reliable system can become dangerous in the hands of someone we trust too much. One spring day, Zoe decided to sort through Mary's things that she still kept in her house. In an old bag, she found a notebook with the outline of an article, the same one about abusive and controlling behavior that had opened Mary's eyes to her own relationship. In the margin was a note. Freedom begins with the realization of unfreedom. Zoe closed the notebook and went to the window. It was raining outside, but the sun was breaking through the clouds. Somewhere in the city, other women were reading similar articles, realizing the same truths, making the same decisions. Some managed to escape, some didn't. But the truth remained the same. No love is worth freedom. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. Zoe pulled it out, looked at the screen, and smiled for the first time in a long time. Life went on, and in this new life, she promised herself to watch for warning signs. Not just in her life, in the lives of others. Because sometimes one timely word could save someone's life. Technology was not to blame for anything. They remained just a tool in the hands of people. Light or dark, they were made by those who controlled them. And maybe the main lesson of this story was this: it is not technology that makes us vulnerable. What makes us vulnerable is our blind faith in those who call control love.